Hey, everybody. It is Alex Hare, the founder at Optimum Joy, and we are back for the second part of our Enneagram series with Pricilla Dean, who comes to us from Evergreen Counseling out in the western suburbs of Chicago. And if you didn't get a chance to listen to the introduction on the Enneagram, the first one, that's okay. This is just a concept. We're talking about centers of intelligence today, which is really, Priscilla's going to get into kind of defining some of that, but it's like you're in the head, you're in the feelings, or you're in the body, essentially. You're a thinker, a feeler, or the body. But that's really kind of a concept that just like continues to build. And really, I think the Enneagram is nice. I don't know if you'd agree with this, Priscilla. There's so many different ways in to get at self-discovery, and the centers of intelligence is like one way that we in our core type show up in the way. So let me turn it over to you. Maybe just introduce us to this idea of centers of intelligence. Like maybe there's people out there who know the Enneagram or don't, and they're like, what the heck is that? So
Yeah, I think some people go straight to type. They're like, oh, there's 9 types. Let me find my type. That's fine. But what they end up finding out maybe later, or they don't at all, is that there are 3 primary centers of intelligence within those 9 types. So there are 3 groups of 3, which is the 3 head types, 3 heart types or feeling types, or 3 body types, sometimes called gut types. So those are categories within the types. And sometimes when you don't know your type, it's really helpful sometimes to start finding whether you're like a head type, maybe a body type, or heart type. Some people are like, oh yeah, I totally like have all the feels. I already know, like I'm a heart type. But some people don't have it. I certainly did not know like where I like fit on like my dominant kind of center, because you will have within your type. So if you're a type 7, let's say your dominant center is going to be the head type. So I think that keeping that in mind when you're either typing yourself or keeping an open mind about other people that have types that that maybe you guys talk about it, about sometimes it looks a little bit different. And I call them centers of intelligence. Some people call them other things, but I like to refer to them as centers of intelligence because we tend to think of, when we hear the word intelligence, cognitive functioning,
right.
like intelligence tests and things like that, IQ. And that's, the Enneagram's great. It's a little more open-minded than that. It's like we can have a body intelligence and know things with our bodies without knowing things up here or in here.
Exactly.
And we might know things on the emotional level that maybe those head and gut types are like, what did you pick up on? And the heart types are like, y'all didn't see that. So, there's a lot of intelligences that we all actually have all 3. But we also need each other that are dominant and other types to kind of open our eyes a little bit. So it causes us to be more humble about our dominant type, knowing that we need each other, and also aware that you might be a little bit not as aware of your other 2 centers of intelligence within you, maybe a little underdeveloped. And the Enneagram is all about balance and developing that inner awareness of what you are too developed in, and what you're more underdeveloped in.
Right, exactly.
So that's my thought.
Yeah. And, I feel like I've heard people almost just say, obviously your core type is the main way you show up in the world, but center of its intelligence, it's kind of a way of knowing in a way that like your type often manifests. So like, intelligence, I kind of like, as we loosely define it, it's kind of like, this is a way of knowing. It's a way of knowledge. It's a way of insight that like, maybe we are just more dominant in using, so, so I really like that. And I even, I know that you and I will get into this at some point in time, but the thoughts that's going in my head is like, oh wow, we are a Western culture. So like, are we just one big like cognitive brain walking around, like how does like maybe culture kind of impact the way we even value some of the different centers? So
there are messages that value like, and within all different kinds of messages about what is important, but in reality, Enneagram is very equal in its way of like, they all are important.
Yeah, exactly. You know what? I was just thinking, I'm just going to orient us around the circle from your Enneagram handout, if that's okay. And then maybe, Priscilla, I don't know if this would be a good place to start, is just to pick a center and talk about each type in each center, if that feels good to you. But so this is like, when we think about the Enneagram, this is really the like symbol we see. And the centers of intelligence is really groupings of 3s. So for the body, it's going to be the you probably can't really see this, but it's 1, 9, and 8. These are like the
Mhm.
body or the gut kind of in really maybe like all of them are instinctual. So I don't even like that language, but the body or the gut center.
Mhm.
Whereas you have 7, 6, and 5 in this grouping of three that are more of the thinker or the headspace center of intelligence. And then you have 4, 3, or 2 that we'd say are in kind of the heart or the feeling. So that's just
Mhm.
so you guys know, this is what we're talking about.
Yes.
And some people might be a visual learner. So that's what we're talking about is this other kind of grouping on the Enneagram besides your core type. So
Yes. What I find interesting too is that if you're in the center of any of those numbers, like I would say if you're a 5, you're a 9 or a 4. Is that right?
3.
Right. 3, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm like trying to picture it. You have both wings that are both in that same center. So you're real, like if you are in those, you have to be very aware of your center of intelligence because your wings aren't touching another intelligence. So
Yeah.
keeping that in mind too, if you know like for sure that you're a 3 or for sure you're a 9. Nines are all instinct and body really with their wings too. So kind of coming out of that is an interesting thought about like where's my heart and where is my head too,
Yeah.
and so for the other types too. So keeping that in mind going forward. I probably won't go too into that, but as you're looking at those numbers, I'm like, yeah, there's some people can access their wings kind of strongly in other centers, but some people can't.
Yeah.
Um, so it's very interesting depending on the type. Okay, so where should we start?
Well, I wonder, you being a 9 and I being an 8 are both body types. So I wonder if we should maybe save that to the end, actually, because I would imagine we would have a lot personally to say about that. And let's make sure we get through the heart and the head
Yes.
first
Yeah,
before
I
we get to
agree.
the body. So maybe I feel like a lot of people start with the heart. So maybe we should start with the head, heart, body. What do you think about that?
I love that. Let's start with the head. Yeah, that's great. I think that's good. The head is the 5, 6, 7. So the 6 would be the center of the head types. And then we've got the 5 and the 7. The 5 being the observer, the 6 being the skeptic or loyalist or dependable one, the 7 being the adventurer, risk taker. So these are these head types. So as I've taught this before, all three of these types will lead with their head when it comes to behavior, when it comes to their thoughts of like, I want to really think about this first. They might even talk that way of like, oh, I think about this and I think about that. Or what about this idea? Analysis is big for all three of these types.
Hmm.
Even 7s, which I'll get into in a minute. 5s and 6s are going to be a little more obvious head types. They're thinking, they're analyzing for their own reasons. The themes that I wanted to kind of draw out within all three, they all three have kind of themes that they kind of struggle with, because when you spend a lot of time in your head, there are some themes that emerge that you struggle with or that you can overdevelop. Either the ego says this is a good thing and you need to keep doing this, or it's something that's really hard and it kind of becomes burdensome to the ego.
Right.
So the theme for the head type is actually anxiety and fear, concerns about security, which
Yep.
makes sense, right? I mean, you spend a lot of time in your head, you're thinking, and you're not really thinking about how your body's feeling, or you might be thinking about the past perhaps, but a lot of times it's you're analyzing what could happen, what are the possibilities here? Whether you're a 7, you're like, I'm thinking about the next fun thing I'm going to do. The 6 is like, what could go wrong? I mean, the 5 is like, what else is we're not examining here? Let's think about all possibilities.
Right.
So again, there, if you stay there really long without incorporating, again, this isn't overdevelopment, without incorporating your heart and your body, you start to become very afraid.
Yeah.
You might be aware of that fear and be like, oh yeah, of course I'm afraid.
Hmm.
Duh. I have a lot of
Yeah.
anxiety. I get medicated. It's great. Or, you may not be aware of that. You'd be like, no, I'm not really a fearful person. I don't really struggle with that. But the Enneagram is again about spiritual concepts. It's about the idea that fear is maybe not anxiety, in the kind of clinical term that we use it at work when we're seeing
Right.
clients. It's fear of like the unknown, because
Yeah.
in your head, you don't know what's going to happen. You can't explore all the facts and you don't know all the possibilities.
Yep.
So
Yep.
there is this unknown that can really bring a lot of deep fear. So I think that the head types really can get stuck in kind of beliefs and ideas and about fear and anxiety.
Hmm.
What else
You
I
know,
wanted to say? Go ahead.
While you're looking at that, Priscilla, I'm curious if this would resonate with you. So when I went through the IEQ9 training for all this, they gave
Yeah.
some language that I thought was so helpful
Oh,
that
tell me.
almost was like, yeah, it was almost like directional with the center of intelligence. So like if the thinkers really hinge around fear, it's like sixes look outward into the world, that's the
Yes.
direction, and they see all the threats and challenges, but their fear is like more that they won't be enough to show up in the place of a threat or
Yes.
a challenge. So their
Mhm.
direction is in that way. Whereas like fives, they look out into the world and they see all the threats and challenges, but they're like the only safe places within me.
Yes, within me. Ooh, that's interesting.
You know,
Yes, the direction is different.
yeah. So like a very different, but still centering around fear. Whereas sevens, they like see or feel like fear and like the pain. We know like sevens are
Yes.
kind of like the avoidance of pain, and
Yes.
their way to manage it is they forget it. That it's just kind of
Yes.
like there isn't really a
Doesn't
direction.
matter.
Well,
Mhm.
it's kind of their the direction is a little
I wonder if it's ambivalent, like they go
it
out and
is
they'll go in. There's
exactly,
there's
that's the
maybe because
exact
they
word.
there tends to be in the three, there tends to be more like one type that goes within and without, and one that overdoes it, and
Yep,
one that underdoes it. So
exactly.
interesting.
Yeah.
Hmm. That's really great. The direction is really important. And the question here for all head types is to really consider like where your fear might be aimed at. Yeah, is it more external? Is it more like if the world is a frightening place, I don't need to engage with it, so I'm going to stay within here? Or fear is not a problem, don't worry about it. A lot
Exactly.
of like, I'm not afraid, I don't have anxiety. When if you do identify with the seven, there is like perhaps some repressed blind spots that are need to be noticed. Um, yeah, so I think that the lack of support for the head types is tricky because there is this sense of like, I need this groundedness, because in your head you're not grounded, because grounded really comes from the body.
Yeah.
So I encourage a lot of head types to work with the body, and again with mindfulness, meditation, these things we do to treat anxiety. It is already kind of intuitive. Where like your therapist is like, "Well, have you meditated?" And they're like, "No." Like, well, the reason why we say things like that is to kind of turn off the head. People with OCD, people that have their racing thoughts, panic attacks sometimes that are not just body based, but are really just like anxiety attacks that they can't turn their brain off. It's 3 a.m. They're on YouTube. They can't stop doom scrolling.
Exactly.
Like, like
Yeah.
we need to like slow down and come to our body center, and understand that the head is so important, but it can get into overdrive. And
Mhm.
so the head types really can like think about and catch themselves in the act, as I think one of these books likes to talk about it that way, catching ourselves in the act of when our head is really overactivated. And usually fear is the reason, and kind of bringing some self-compassion that if you're a head type,
Yeah.
that's probably just going to be a thing you deal with. And that's okay.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, what I like about what you just said is like reaching, if the Enneagram is about balance and development, and really, touching on what we talked about last time about our core type is really a fixation. The word
Yes.
personality is really to put on a mask, right?
Yes.
So we put on the mask of our overdeveloped personality structure to
Hmm.
deal with the world, and really it's getting back to essence and balance.
Yes.
And I think that
Hmm.
what you're saying is kind of like, man, if I over fixate on head and that's
Hmm.
my main way of dealing with the world, how do I maybe reach like kind of across the enneagram, reach across to the body and start to use some of those modalities that would
Yes.
really just center somebody and be like a growth, it'd be like a growth experience.
Absolutely. Yeah, there is a lot of awareness that needs to be cultivated when we are just get in a tizzy, in our heads for as head types. I work with a lot of head types. They come to therapy for different reasons. A lot of it's just like their anxiety. It's hard to connect with other people that don't think that way either. Like, well, just calm down, it's fine. Or just like,
Yeah.
you're kind of like robotic, why are you thinking about things all the time? It's like, well, it's hard to stop, it's like slowing down is really difficult. Therapy is good for that. um, I did want to go into like shifting gears here, each type and how it kind of manifests as head, very briefly, and kind of describe
Oh,
them.
perfect.
So
Yeah.
the type 5, the observer, the objective perspective, they obviously can kind of seem like head types. They tend to be really aware of facts and value the factual nature, and the objective nature, if at all possible, of any situation, whether it's a relationship or it's their job or their career or anything that their personality has to function with. And so the head is pretty obvious that they like that sort of thing. So I'm married to a wonderful 5, and he loves to just listen and learn things. They're very curious. Sometimes though, like I would say that in general, 5s, I know other 5s too, they're willing to open pretty much any door if it's curious to them. And so you can think about that. Like a lot of us that are not head types, I'm like, he like brings up something like, I don't want to think about that. That's really scary. And he's like, but maybe we should. And he's right sometimes. But like there is a sense of they bring the strength of like, let's talk about the hard questions because we need to know, as much as we can. But I think at the same time, it can really trigger fear in other people and also in themselves. They're like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have opened that door. That was a lot. Now we're feeling things and experiencing body sensations that are uncomfortable. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, my brother-in-law is strongly identifies with a 5, and he's one of my favorite people to take a road trip with, actually, mostly because I'm like, we're going to talk about the most interesting things.
Oh, yeah.
I love, and obviously we live 5 hours out of Chicago. Like if we ever all drive home together, it's like, ooh, like, what are we going to talk about? So
yeah, exactly. They tend to be a wealth of knowledge inside. Their struggle, of course, is like accessing some of the heart type situations. If they have a 4-wing, that could be helpful, but some of the feelings and there's some of their blind spots, of course, have to do with things they don't know, driving it, sometimes emotions driving what they research. But at the same time, I think like 5s experiencing the head, it makes a lot of sense for people like, oh yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of heady. And we might describe them that way. 6s, also very head type oriented. I would say that all 6s can be that way. Sometimes they don't always act that way. Sometimes they're very warm and nice and like concerned about your feelings and that sort of thing. So it doesn't always look like a 6 is a head type, but when you really get to know them, you can see that they're future oriented very much. Of like, not just of what could go wrong, but what could go right, what could we do better next time, problem solvers more so, of like, this was like not a bad problem, but it could be worse, or we could avoid it altogether next time, we could do this instead. They tend to be kind of detectives in that way. And again, they're still future oriented. I think they get the negative stereotype of being just anxious all the time. There are 6s that don't really struggle too much with anxiety. They might struggle with fear, but it can be more spiritually based fear, more than just like, oh, I'm what if all the time. It's not really like that. I would say that if they're overdeveloped in the 6, it can be that way, but I think that we should throw out the stereotype that all 6s are anxious. This is not true. And all the types experience anxiety.
Absolutely.
For sure. But I think, they experience the head and fear. Like their vice specifically is called fear because they're right in the middle of the head triad. So they experience fear, again, as I said, like spiritual, existential, that they can't, like you said, find that security within themselves. And they're looking to their friend, their spouse, their partner, their parents to say, you tell me what to do. I don't know. That's the false myth they believe, based truly from their fear that they are not enough, that they can't know for themselves what's safe or what's real, when they're highly intelligent people most of the time. They have probably analyzed more than anybody else has about what the right way to do it is, but they're like, no, you tell me. So there tends to be like that kind of tricky thing that they can trip up on about their fear. Let's go on to 7. The 7, again, doesn't look like a head type all the time. They're not that easy to type right away. They can look like other types quite a bit, but.
Would you say, with the 7, the 9, and the 3 being at the center, these are the 3 that are, in a way, because they're so centered in their intelligence, they're actually the most detached from their center. Oh, wait, 7 isn't the center.
7's not detached. Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
But it is ambivalent. There's an ambivalence what I'm thinking about. It's the ambivalence, because that's what I'm getting a little mixed up with what I've kind of learned with that. But it's in a way, it really doesn't look like the 3, which we'll get into, almost looks like they're not a heart type.
Yes,
and the 9, like you said, a body type, a gut type. Yeah. Yes. So it's
important to keep aware of that. And I think they're hard to type for that reason sometimes too, because their ego works against and for it, depending, but the issue always comes back to fear. or heart or body, the issue. It comes back to whether it's an over or under, depending on the day sometimes. So the 7 core issues of fear of pain specifically, so we can use fear. Some 7s do really struggle with anxiety, of course, and we think of them as just very happy all the time. They are the most likely to smile when they're anxious, I think. I think 6s do that too. But I think like there's a sense of when they feel afraid, they're not going to go ahead and tell you. And a 6 is going to tell you. The 7 isn't necessarily going to be like, I'm really freaked out right now. He's going to be like, let's go do this thing. Let's hurry up. Let's go. Come on, let's go. There is a little bit more action to it, especially if they have an 8-wing. They might doom scroll and stay on their phone to try to distract themselves. But it tends to be like, again, just very head type oriented. They're planners. I think 6s are planners too, but 7s like to plan everything, positive things, and also preparing for the negative. They don't want to feel that pain. So whatever they need to do, whether it's like kind of uncomfortable, they'll risk that if it means they're not going to bring more pain to themselves or to the ones they love too. I think there's that connection piece to 7s too, to other people.
Yeah.
But I would say, so they're self-referencing. So they're thinking about, I'm concerned about my pain. So what am I going to do to help avoid me feeling those things? The vice is gluttony. So I think that comes into it a little bit. There's never enough you can do to avoid pain. So I think that that's what causes them to sit on the gas pedal quite a bit. You can never plan enough or do enough things to avoid those painful feelings. So the growth edge for the 7s is really to come back and experience pain as something that can be a teacher, something that can help them connect with those they love and help them receive love from other people as well. But it's a very hard thing because the ego is really fixated on not doing those things.
Yeah. And, just from like not an Enneagram perspective, but a neuroscience perspective, thinking through that, like, wow, like therapists, they have that, like the way out is through, you almost have to move through the emotional experience until it's able to finish the cycle within your neurological system and release, and I think that for 7 to actually embrace a little bit of that pain. Because if the fear is I get stuck in it forever, I'll never not be in pain. It's kind of like, well, if you can just stick in it long enough to learn from it, like you said, you will actually like move through it.
You will. And you'll be able to leave it truly behind you in a lot of ways too, if you allow the cycle of the emotions, to, complete. I do think that you're right. The path is through, and suffering is the best teacher. I do think though, it occurs to me too, that it requires coming out of the head center to do some of that work. It requires coming to the heart to kind of experience that pain, because a lot of where we experience pain and anguish is right here. But sometimes it's in the body too. 7 sometimes are really disconnected from their bodies. They can overdo it so much they can injure themselves because they love to bungee jump, or they love to, that's stereotypical, but they love to, like, some of them work really hard to get the money they want to do, is to spend to travel as much as they do, and they neglect their bodies. So sometimes it's like, maybe I need to experience the fact that I just drank too much, or I traveled too much, now I have no more money. I need to experience that pain in order to kind of think about my life and the choices in the life I want to live. And is this really living if I'm just running and avoiding? So
I was laughing earlier because and my sister and my brother-in-law, who are the 5, my brother-in-law, my sister who's a 7, they wouldn't mind me saying this, but I was cracking up because what you were saying about planning, and almost like a gluttonous planning, we have been cracking up together because my sister, they're closing on a house, I think Monday or Tuesday. She has actually been packed and packing for weeks now. So they have literally been yes, but I'm laughing because really I think part of it, and maybe, I don't know if she would agree with this or not, she's not here to obviously say, is like, moving is a pain. I don't want to experience the pain of disorganized moving. So I'm going to be over planned and over prepared
So it's
And
not like fun
literally,
stuff. It's just like, I'm going to make sure to protect myself from that feeling. Yes.
exactly. So like they've been like completely packed up for their move for like 18 days straight, you know, like an entire month they've basically been packed up for their
Wow,
move.
that's
So we,
impressive. I could not,
yes.
I don't have any part that wants to do that. But
I'll
I
have to
hear
ask
that's a
her about
great
that.
example. I love that example because it is absolutely like the stereotype is the sevens are partiers and like they're flighty and flaky or whatever. And I think that's totally false. I think it's really about the core issues of avoiding that pain and doing whatever it takes. Even very organized things they get praised for. Beatrice just is very much about keeping an eye on the things you're praised for in your ego, because you'll never look at those. Otherwise, you're like, yeah, everybody likes it. It's great. I'm
Oh
like,
man,
isn't the best thing for you?
that's good. That's so
You
good.
know, it's
I
good
laugh
stuff.
because when we get around to the 8, I'm like, oh no. People
Oh
definitely
no.
praise me for certain things that I'm like,
Oh yeah, same. Oh my gosh, right?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
everybody does. Like, well, let's keep an eye on that. Of like, let's keep us humble, right?
yeah,
Oh, good
yep.
stuff. That's a good teacher to do that.
Anything anything else you want to kind of say about head centers of intelligence other than the fact that it's like it looks different in each type,
Yes.
and really the work, if I'm summarizing you correctly, the work of the head center of intelligence is to seek balance by reaching across to the body and by reaching across to their heart to develop some of
Yes.
those
Yes.
underdeveloped areas of
Yes.
expression.
The two steps really, I think, to kind of bear bones it a little bit here is to first be aware of the fear themes in your type. Is that 5 men,
Mm,
I think their fear when they're like, deep diving into the internet about this one thing.
yeah.
But they probably are, it's a way to avoid participating in life sometimes. Perhaps they're hoarding their energy and time too much. And so like there's this fear that's driving us. You have to notice it first. You're not going to be able to handle that without noticing it. Noticing it is painful. That's like the biggest part. And sometimes people tell us in ways we don't want to hear it either. Like, are
Yeah.
you okay? Then these head types are like, I'm fine. What's the problem? Everything's great. We all have that. It's not just head types, but there is this denial. So the acknowledgement takes humility to do that. And then the second part is, yes, what do I do with that acknowledgement? We don't just sit there with that, oh, well, fear's driving me. Oh no, I did it again, and shame ourselves. Instead, it is about, hey, I actually have 2 other centers of intelligence that I'm just not using. And the idea is to wake them up. With 6s love to exercise. I've heard 5s and 7s love it too. Actually, it's a great way to get in touch with your body,
Mhm.
to get out of your head. Yoga is one way, running is another. Activate different systems in the body.
Yeah.
Go to a funeral or watch, don't be afraid to click on something about something sad. There's plenty of
Yeah.
sad things. If that's something that you avoid or you do that
Mhm.
too hard, I'm thinking 6s to avoid, of like
Mhm.
allow your heart to come into the space. Ask your heart too in a journal or with a therapist, what am I not feeling? What am I feeling not connected to? What am I avoiding? What feelings might I be avoiding here? Then instead I'm worrying about, instead I'm actually might be feeling grief or loss, which are the themes for the heart types, which we'll get into next.
Yeah. Yeah. Why don't we do that now? Why don't we roll right into the heart types? We can start kind of
Okay.
in whatever place you want, but
Yeah.
those good old feelers.
The feelers, we love the feelers. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit. Oh, I forgot. Before we're going to the heart types, I did want to talk about
Yeah,
how I think Western society really values
please.
head types. And I want to talk about gender. I think gender wise, we value men who are head types. So again, there's some blind spots here. Women who are head types, not always praised for their, analysis and critical thinking skills, when men are quite a bit. If you find, and so I think a lot of men want to be 5s when maybe they're a body type or a heart type. They type that way because that
Mhm.
would make them more lovable or acceptable.
Yeah. Yep.
And so women don't always want to type as these intellectual types. And when there could be really that way. So let's keep an eye on some of the bias that I think culture tells us and gender tells us. Um, yeah, some types are more gender neutral when it comes to stereotypes. I think 7s are more gender neutral.
I think
Um,
so.
yeah, and I'm trying to think.
I'm like, is that the only
Threes
one?
can
Maybe
threes can be more gender neutral, I think, and 9s possibly because we could be look like anyone.
yeah.
But I think typically though, there's going to be ones like, oh, this is like feminine qualities we value or masculine qualities.
Exactly.
But remember that the head type is just one of three intelligence centers. It's not the most important. I'm
Yeah.
telling that to fives. I'm just kidding. Some people are like, it's the only one that matters. And that's what we need to put our hope in. The idea is that together is where we find wisdom. The heart, your head, and your body is where wisdom resides,
Yeah. Yep.
not just the one. So, and wisdom is, of course, the application of something we know.
Yeah.
So, okay, what we're gonna
Yep.
say?
Well, we were just kind of laughing before we got on here about the cultural piece because essentially, like, just like it just needs to be acknowledged that we grow up, we if you live in the United States or grew up in the United States, you are living, working, experiencing life out of a Western culture that is
Yes,
so not only head, but also very left brain, lists,
yes,
organization, words, that it's all kind of like it's very structured, and it's like that
yes,
that is like a beautiful thing. It's like part of our system,
sure.
but it is like
It's
one
overvalued.
one way and we're biased towards it.
It's
So,
overvalued is the problem. It's
yeah,
important, but it be overvalued with the rejection of these other ways we know things.
exactly.
And so incorporating all of them is really important. And again, and people to be like, if you're praised a lot for being intellectual and you're a head type, again, keeping an eye on that praise of like, yeah, but then my relationships suffer because I don't know how to find my heart. you
Yeah,
know,
yep, yep.
or like my body is suffering because I'm just in my head all day long and I have chronic
Mhm.
illness or I have, I injured myself or whatever, by accident. There's, these other things that we don't value when we overvalue things because culture says it's good or our boss says it's good or whatever.
Exactly.
Um, it's something that, again, Enneagram is all about finding those blind spots.
Exactly.
Okay, great. That's a great point. Thank you. I want to talk about that with the other ones too, because the heart center, the feeling emotional center, is the type 2, type 3, and type 4. Um,
You keep talking. I just a headphone fell out of my ear, and I'm just gonna reach down and get it really quick. But
okay,
you
go
keep
ahead.
talking
Go
about,
ahead.
just so
Okay,
you know, I'm just gonna disappear for one hot second. I'll be back.
no problem. You grab it. So the heart center, they have a specific theme. Too, we talked about the theme for the head type being more fear-based.
Mhm.
The heart center's theme, there's a little bit of debate on this actually. And I'll tell you what I think, but there are the two camps right now about the heart center issues. Thematic issues are grief and loss of some kind,
Mhm.
or shame. So
Mm.
I'm kind of go with the grief and loss a little bit more.
Oh,
I'm,
interesting.
I'm I'm in the camp more that shame is a little bit common to all types. But really, I think another kind of maybe a third element that comes into grief and loss is actually self-image. And that's about
Mm.
attachment to others and relationships. So
Yeah.
like how we see ourselves, how you see me, this is about people. This is about
Mhm.
feelings, but in relationship about connection with other people.
Yep.
And so that of course brings up grief and loss. If we've lost that connection, it can bring up shame of like, do you reject me? Is there something wrong with me? So again, there's like, it's
Yeah.
not like these are all bad themes. It's just, it's hard, I think, for people to pick one. I
Yep.
do think it's always fascinating when I talk to a heart type about their issues with grief and loss,
Oh,
because
yeah.
longing is in this, desire is in this of like, I really want a partner, or my family's not what it used to be. And it's
Yep.
really painful to experience that. Um, you know, or people don't see me for who I am, and that's really hard.
Right.
So it's
Right.
usually, I would say the theme might be just people and relationships and connection, if we're gonna like pick our own theme here. What do you think, Alex? What do you think about like the different kinds of
Yeah.
ideas that people have? Because the teachers are really united on the head being fear, if that makes sense. I haven't heard too much
I
debate on it.
know. Yeah, well, it's kind of like if the head is fear, the heart is I've kind of more consistently heard the shame piece, but I almost like to think about it more in the term of like essence, but
Mm,
obviously all of us are working towards like the essence of ourselves.
yes,
So it does get the heart type does get a little convoluted, I feel like, because there's these
yes,
terms or these concepts that are specific to the center of intelligence and also more generalizable around the circle, and
yes,
sometimes there's just things, kind of like you were saying, the 6, they're in the fear part, but also their fixation is fear. There's
yes.
sometimes some, like,
Yeah,
overlap,
there's no overlap.
and
Absolutely.
yeah, but I think that the
Yeah.
essence question almost of, like, what you were saying is, like, when in reference to other people, it starts to ask these questions of like, am I good enough? You know,
Mhm.
like, will this person love me?
Yes,
What do people think about me? Is there something wrong
yes,
with me? You know, and those sound a lot like shame. And it's not that
yes.
other types in different centers don't ask those, but it's almost more maybe,
But the themes, they always seem to come back to that. And I
yep,
would even say, like, if you're a 9 or like a body type, or if you're like a head type, when you go to your heart type, some of the themes should come up if you're in your
yeah.
heart space. You know, like if you're a 6 and you're at your 3 for some reason because of stress or whatever, you're going to have more thematic issues of shame perhaps come up, or
Hmm.
of grief and loss. So again, that's why we talk about the themes too. I'm a 9, and so I'll go to 6 under stressful circumstances sometimes. And so like that fear can come up on an existential level, where normally if I'm sitting in pretty in my 9, it's not always going to be a theme. So again, when we're talking about these themes, let's remember, like, because the Enneagram's so fluid with these types and they overlap so much, keeping your number and type in mind about these themes too. And you can
Exactly.
decide for yourself what maybe a theme might be real
Oh,
for
I love
you.
that, honestly. Yeah.
Not like, and that's why this is spiritual and psychological, of like what makes sense. Some people really identify with the shame. Some people are like, oh yeah, grief and loss has been such a thing. I really dwell on what I've lost. It's hard for me to
Hmm.
sit with what I have, or what I could have someday. I have hope, you know. So um, the 2 is one we think of obviously as more of a someone who wants to connect with others, a helper.
Hmm.
Um, their grief and loss issues are a little bit mysterious sometimes,
Hmm.
and because to get a 2 to start talking to you about how they feel about themselves or what they personally lost means they're no longer helping you. And so that's them stepping out of their ego a little bit. So if a 2 you love does that to you, you should be honored and praise that that they
Oh,
do that. They let down
yeah.
their guard and say, this is really hard for me, and allow that heart space to have room for you in the relationship,
Hmm.
room for them. um, and the 2's issues, I think, with will you love me, you know, that comes with um, their fear, their basic fear, according to Russ and Hudson. They talk about basic core fears of the types, and the 2's core fears is being unloved for who they are. And so that can certainly touch on shame, of like that I'm not lovable unless I help you. If I say no, like I can't help you, will you reject me?
Right. Right.
This is again about people and connection. They ask these questions, and let's be real, we all have questions like this. Like, if I'm not who you want me to be, will you love me? Will you accept me? The 2's are the archetype of the question we all ask, but they struggle with these issues the most in their relationships.
Yep.
The 2's kind of growth path is to really make space for their heart, I think, to some
Mm.
degree, and also like think critically about their need to help others, to kind of access their head and access
Yeah.
their body too,
Hmm.
because 2's that help too much get angry. And then people would say, oh, that's bad, you know, 2's are pissed off and mad and they're feeling taken advantage of. But I'm like, maybe that's just internal boundaries going off,
Yeah.
you
Yep.
know, of like, I'm helping too much, time to stop.
Yep.
That their body and their anger can help them do that.
Yep.
um, so the 2 stepping out of that heart center can look more like anger, which sounds like a feeling, but actually Enneagram teaching, anger is actually a body sensation. It's not like
Exactly.
a heart space.
Yep.
So
But I
I'm
would
gonna
say
clarify.
even specifically like this, would you agree with this? That like the specific brand of anger that twos maybe um can sit in or struggle with is bitterness. That's
Yes,
kind of the
because it's
brand
not
of
expressed
their
sometimes. So
anger.
if it's exactly, so if it's expressed, in especially an assertive, firm kind of way with someone they love and respectively, it's really healthy. It's really important. But
Hmm.
yes, it's those 2's that swallow it
Yep.
every time with those people they love, and that's the bitterness can really eat them up, and they don't feel fulfilled, and it leaks out of them in passive aggressive ways. I think uh, Beatrice Chestnut Fierce talks about it. um, the feeling types, all of them can lead to oversensitivity, or emotional manipulation. So this is where it can get kind of dark in that end of like, when you're not accessing your other centers, your body and your head, you can really get stuck in your feels. And it's not just, oh, I'm crying all the time. It's no, it's actually like this resentment and pain and anguish that you're holding on to, and that you can experience joy and connection, which is, and love. That's the thing that you
Yeah.
need and everyone needs.
Yep. Yep. You know, I'm
So that's the 2.
Well, even just kind of I'm thinking about directionally, if we almost like feelings or love, kind of like how we did in the other is like directionally the twos are the outward ones where they're
Yes,
like, how does everybody else feel so that I can take care of them
yes,
and get what I love. Fours are the more internal,
inward.
you
Hmm.
know, they
Yes,
their kind of point of reference is how do I feel, you know,
yes,
and threes are the ambivalent.
yes. They'll
uh
go back and forth. How do I feel? How do you feel? Maybe
mhm,
feelings are uncomfortable.
mhm,
Let's go do something. So there's
mhm,
like
yeah,
that avoidance and repression, kind of like the seven was in the head centers.
yep,
So yes, I think that's a good point. The ambivalent one here is the three, and the four can overuse the feelings. The twos can underuse them for themselves.
yep, yep, yep,
Um,
yep,
and it's interesting because they tend to be, they're just deep feelers. And I think like all three of the heart types have this intelligence to pick up on feelings of others easily. Sometimes I would say fours are good at this too. And if two hasn't really asked themselves how they feel, this seems every time I have a two in my office, I'm coaching them. I'm like, you have this great skill, use it for yourself. I'm like, oh, that's
yes,
selfish. But it's like, you need it. You need it
yeah,
to feel happy,
yep,
so and all that, to step out of that to helping kind of fixation. But yes, I think it's important to kind of identify like which ones are the under ones, over ones, and ambivalent. The three is the
exactly.
more ambivalent, the achiever. Again, these don't look like heart types. So
Mm-mm.
these look like sevens sometimes because they are usually off to the next thing. They can look like ones. They work really hard. Threes and ones are the workaholics of the Enneagram. So they work really hard, but they don't work hard like for the reasons ones work hard. Their
Mm-mm.
motives are key. Um, the threes motives are to work hard is their feelings. That might feel strange if you're a three to hear that.
Yeah,
Because again, we talk about it being repressed and like pushed out of mind. If you're feeling upset about something or you feel like someone will reject you, you're going to work very hard to make your project perfect,
exactly.
or your family perfect, or your relationships perfect, whatever, or your home or whatever. You're going to work very hard based on a fear of rejection by others. Again, feelings, connection, all these um, relationships being the
Yep.
driver here. The work for the three really is to pay attention to they have feelings. Twos and fours know they have feelings. If twos have feelings with others, fours have a lot of feelings in general. But the threes are like, oh, okay. I'm their wake up calls like I'm working really hard. What am I not feeling?
Yep.
What is
Yep.
driving this? Am I just like afraid of this person rejecting me? Am I afraid of maybe that I lost someone? I don't want to feel that way right now. Like
Mhm.
sometimes grief, I mean, that we live in a world that's highly traumatized in this pandemic. There's a lot of grief people are experiencing in real life of real death, or just grief of our way of life. And threes as feelers, they can pick up on that. And you may not know as a three that you're picking up on that.
Mhm.
It might drive you to work really hard at your business or
Yeah.
your home, but it's like slow down and allow that feeling to be present.
Yep.
So it is staying in the heart center to some degree for threes, which I think is still important because if you're a repressor, but again, that acknowledgement of what's really going on is really important.
Yep.
That acknowledgement piece is really painful um, to do, or it's just like, what's the point? I don't get it.
Yeah.
Well, because it's
Yeah,
there
yeah, yeah.
anyway.
Yeah. Well,
Because it's
even just,
there
you
anyway.
know, I think I've had the like opportunity just to work with some threes in a therapy context. You know, I'm thinking about one woman specifically that like we literally, you know, it's like a lot of therapists will do this with a lot of clients who are not threes just to create emotional literacy, but to
Mm.
literally just start with or literally just kind of like have the list of feeling words
Oh yeah,
on
like
like
the
a
feelings wheels are great for threes.
yeah,
You should put them
and
up
it's
in
just
your
kind of like
I'm feeling that. Okay. Yeah, just
yeah.
naming it. Acknowledgement is key. I totally agree.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's like sometimes it's like we can get into it. We don't have to get into it. But if you have a little bit of sadness in you, let's just like acknowledge that there's some type of
Yeah.
sadness in you, you
Tell
know?
someone you
Or
love, or just, tweet it or something. Just have it be like, I'm acknowledging it. It's present. I'm not going to sit here and be like, it's fine. I'm a robot. I can do whatever. I'm a machine. Like, no one is that way. And as a heart type, you're missing out on your intelligence here too. Is that when you're paying attention to your feelings, there's a lot that you can pick up on about each
mhm.
other, if like people in your life and yourself, you can learn a lot about
Exactly.
yourself too, like what things like have brought you pain in your life.
Hmm.
And don't worry, you'll still work hard. There's like, but then I won't work hard.
Well, honestly, it's when I again kind of when I was attending one of these like Enneagram trainings, I would sit away this male three, and I feel like threes and eights kind of can vibe with each other sometimes.
Oh
But
yeah.
he was I think that this is not true across the board, but from his story, he was like, well, honestly, because I didn't acknowledge it, I basically had a breakdown, and like, and
Interesting. Yeah.
it was interesting because like now you could tell was very practiced at tuning in, but even in that training, he outperformed us all with notes and everything. And like,
It doesn't
you know,
matter.
uh, so I
That
think
ego's
that
gonna work. It doesn't matter.
yeah, for like to almost for threes to realize that like, oh no, you can really actually take care of yourself and still do really well in life.
Yes,
And maybe even
absolutely.
better
That's a
because
huge
you have the
message.
longevity of time. Yeah.
Yes, I love that. I think that's really great. It's a really compassionate way to look at the three that work so hard. It's like, hey, you have time for yourself too. It's okay. You can do both. You can work hard and
Hmm.
give yourself compassion and a breather sometimes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, it doesn't
Yep.
have to be one or the other.
Yep.
Um, I think threes can be accused of being insensitive,
Yeah.
um, task over people. And that really
Hmm.
does come from an overemphasis on not paying attention to their feelings.
Mm.
And so their relationships really do suffer when they're just doing. This is the main common complaint when you're married to a three or you love a three very deeply. It's like, hey, I'm a person, show up, I'm here, and
Yeah.
threes are like, yeah, we'll get to that, let's do this thing first. But then that three is really like still so driven by their fear. I mean, sorry, well, their fear of rejection or whatever their feelings, I should say, they're driven by their feelings in that overdoing. And so I think that the people that love threes too can say, hey, when you're done with that, let's talk. you know
Exactly.
I
Yep.
think there's something going on. If we're instead of being like, oh, you work too hard, stop that. There's that sense
Yep.
of like compassion that's needed when it's not
Yep.
always easily seen.
Yep.
um
Yep.
okay, so that's the three. Let's talk about four. um I love fours. I love all types, but I have some fours I love in my life.
Oh.
And fours are called, I called them the individualist, but I had the other name. I forgot it from last time. What did I come up with?
Oh gosh. Let me see.
Oh, deep
Intense
feeler.
feeler or the
Yeah,
dreamer. Yep.
the dreamer. Yes, the intense feeler. Yes. So fours have, I would say, the natural way to teach everyone on the Enneagram type about feelings. They are very in tune to their own,
Yeah.
very naturally, and in tune to others too, I would say. I would say that fours, we need them to do that for us, especially those of us that really underdo the whole heart center situation. If you're four in your life, they
Mhm.
bring us that balance,
Mhm.
because they are really experiencing it. But the struggle, of course, with overdoing it, is they feel a lot of shame because, again, let's go to the cultural piece. Emotions are not really highly valued in this culture. They tend to be
Exactly.
disparaged, they tend to be mocked. And fours can really experience that in their developing years or in their family system. This is
Yep.
not something they're like, oh, good job, honey, you're such a deep feeler. You get,
Exactly.
$20 this year or something. They're going to get $20 for the grades. Not for, having like that heart, the pulse on the family system or
Yeah.
or everyone else or themselves. When in reality, if it was fair, nothing is, but if it was
Yep.
fair, we would really value fours for their emotional intelligence. Um, but the suffering, of course, that comes with that, as I said, is that oversensitivity and making
Yep.
head issues or body issues about feelings.
Yep.
And so the blind spot can be like, I'm having an emotional issue about this, when in reality, like maybe they've been neglecting their body that week and they
Mhm.
haven't like
Mhm. Mhm.
made meal plans, or they haven't
Yep.
um, really like asked their friends for help when really they needed help.
Yes.
So like
Yep.
there is a sense of deep struggle when they're not accessing these other centers too. Or they haven't
Yep.
really thought critically about why they're feeling so upset. And
Exactly.
maybe they were actually the reason that they were feeling that way, not the other person.
Yep.
And so when you're really stuck in your feels, you're not using those head type or head centers or
Mhm.
your body centers, it can feel like you're drowning.
Yep.
really truly drowning. That's why there's a reason why sevens avoid feelings and
Which is
the
a
nines take pictures.
terrible, yeah, it's a terrible feeling.
It's terrible. It's like, and so fours are really brave in a lot of ways because they're willing just to just knock on all the feelings doors. The fives are willing to knock on all the facts doors. Fours are knocking all the feelings doors. No problem. Very brave. Maybe foolish, but brave too, another way to look at it. But it's like that if they're drowning, they need to come into their head of like, what makes sense? Do I need to think critically about what my choices were? And analyze what happened from beginning to end. And sometimes therapy is really helpful for that too.
Yep.
Or also like, what is my body telling me? Is it asking
Yeah.
for help and I've been ignoring it because I've been crying all night? You know, like maybe I need to drink some water. Maybe I need to have a good meal. You know, like, there's a little bit of like, or maybe I need to exercise. There is the rejection of the emotions. I mean the other types that when you're so deep in the feels. So
Yep. It's even just
um
like practically, thinking through that like directional component is like,
mhm.
I think just like if that's your direction, it's almost just to kind of come up and be like, what is my context, or
Yeah.
even like in therapy, you're like, oh, what's your triggers? Or like, what was going on
Mhm.
that before, during, and after that made you feel that way?
Right.
Just kind of lifting, because then it's almost, you can start to have not necessarily control over your life, but you feel a little more controlled in the sense that I understand the
It's
wave
more
of my
balanced.
emotion.
You're not
Yep.
drowning anymore.
No.
Yes, you can throw yourself your own life vest and get yourself out of the ocean that's about to drown you, because it does feel
Exactly.
like you're drowning.
Exactly.
So I think like people can offer that, but I think it's best when you use the Enneagram to kind of do it yourself, or ask someone to help you do it and be like, I need to
Yep.
really think critically. Help me out here. I'm not thinking clearly about this at all. I'm stuck in my
Mhm.
feels, so help me out. Um, Especially if you have a head type friend, it's great for that. They're happy to help usually. I will say that fours that have been very um, disparaged in their families or in their relationships for being such deep feelers have a very difficult time being able to move out of their centers. I think that there's a feeling of stuckness, and because they really value being an individual and being unique. So like if they go into a head type, it almost feels like self rejection or self betrayal. I think my work
Yeah.
with fours, I've seen that. It's like if I'm offering a logical solution, now I'm rejecting my feelings.
Yep.
When reality, it's about incorporating and validating the feelings first. And I do work as a clinician. I would encourage all people to do this. Going into your other centers does not mean rejecting your feelings. It means
Mhm.
you actually maybe need to sit with those feelings, not inflame them artificially, but sit with the real ones and
Yep.
validate them, have self-compassion, and then move to maybe the head or your body needs. You can't just do it and flip a switch.
Mm-mm. Well, it's making me think, gosh, just around some of your language around grief and loss,
Mm,
that if that's kind of the hinge pin for the feelings, heart center of the body, that maybe a part of how that interacts with force specifically is a loss of self.
yes,
That if I,
yes.
do I lose in a way a sense of my own self?
The over-identifying with feelings is the myth that you are your feelings.
Yep.
So I
Yep.
will somehow commit self-suicide, or emotionally speaking, if I go to these other centers, and that's just completely foolish and wrong.
Yeah.
Is that you are not your feelings. You have a lot of them and they are very important.
Right. Right.
But really everyone does, and you're the archetype about like how everyone needs to pay attention to their feelings. But
Yeah.
you have such a great brain to analyze. You have a body that has needs and can tell you things that maybe your heart doesn't understand.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
That's
okay,
beautiful.
yeah,
So let's
okay.
unless you have anything, well, let's quick touch on gender culture as it
Oh,
relates to
yes, the heart.
the heart,
Yes. Yes, well, with gender, I think we associate women with emotions. And so we think that so women who are heart types can be dismissed often for being emotional because it confirms the bias of the feminine archetype in that way. And so that's, of course,
Yeah.
ridiculous for many reasons, because so many men are heart types. Um, and women that are heart types don't just have feelings, they have a head and a body center. So the ultimate like kind of struggle for, I think, female heart type is to not sit in that stereotype very nicely and say like, well, this is all I am. Okay, I'm a big feeler. I'm a woman. Cool. Just be like, I'm nuanced and I have a lot of
Yeah.
growing that I'm doing. And for men too, to be like, the emotions are important. And the patriarchy says it's not okay for men to have feelings other than
Mm-mm.
anger. That's okay, but nothing else is.
Mm-mm.
And so ultimately, being in the heart type, strong,
Yeah.
I think males especially struggle thinking that they're a heart type because they get praised for working so hard, but they don't want to think about the fact that maybe their feelings are driving that.
Yeah.
um,
Yep. It's
so
really,
I think
oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Priscilla, but
it's
were you
okay.
going to say something else?
No, no.
Um, I was just remembering, your partner, the other co-owner of the practice, Natasha.
Yes.
Her and I had a conversation, like a interview, and just remembering, one of I think the most helpful definitions of misogyny is the
Mm.
devaluing of the feminine in us all.
Ah,
Both,
yes.
no matter who you are. So, like, I think sometimes women can devalue this, like if we this more feminine way of knowing intuition,
Yes.
creativity, nurturing. There's this kind of what we stereotypically think of as the feminine, but men really lose out in that way too,
Yes, they do.
because if we kind of
Dramatically.
think traumatically almost, like,
Yes.
and again, it's like we live not only in a very logical Western culture, we also live in a very masculine Western
Yes.
culture, that
Yes.
both men and women lose out on that, because I think that
Yes, they
men
do.
also, really, men and women, if we think about more of it, gender's not the right word, but if we think about masculinity and femininity on a continuum, it's like actually both of those things, both masculine and femininity, exist. Like, I have both masculinity and femininity
Yes,
within me, and those are
correct.
both
Yeah,
ways of
it's on a
knowing and being in
continuum.
the world, yeah. So
Yes. Yes, it's very important to be aware of the stereotypes and where you fit in and where maybe you like those stereotypes or they work for you. If
yeah.
you're a man and you're a head type, that's going to work for you. Um, and so like work because the society values that dramatically. But at the same time, like men not missing out on the emotional piece means that their relationships suffer deeply.
Yeah,
When men are just treated as machines who just get angry sometimes, we women don't expect them to have feelings of rejection and pain and disappointment and depression or anxiety. Like we don't expect
hmm
these things. And it's like, and also when men will express that, if women are really buying into this patriarchal nonsense, we don't want to hear it. We're like, no, 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 go
mm-mm.
back to being like a robot. No, thank you. I don't need that in my life. I would much rather you be this like robot that I don't need to worry about too. But in reality, if we accept, yes, the masculine and the feminine within all of us, um, whether it's, I don't know, whatever that looks like for each person, how we define it,
Yeah,
it really is like these heart types. If you're a heart type, really examining these stereotypes is going to be a good idea for yourself
exactly.
about whether you're rewarding that or you're disparaging that in yourself in some way.
Yep. It's, the last thing maybe I'll say on this, if I have anything else to say, is it's reminding me of that story that, the patron saint of our lives, Brene Brown. uh, but she tells that story in one of her first books about the man who came up after her, came up to her after one of her talks and was like, "Oh, this was back when she was only doing research on women and shame." And he says,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh," he says, "what about men?" And she says, "Oh, I don't study men." And he
Yeah.
said, "Well, how convenient." And I might be telling this story wrong, obviously.
Oh, I remember that story. I love
I'm
it.
sorry if
That's
I
great.
misrepresent it,
Well,
but
yeah, it is convenient. It is
yeah,
convenient. No, he's right.
and and he goes on to say, because his wife and his daughter are standing off in the distance, and he basically said, "They would rather see me die on my white horse than do vulnerability," because
Wow.
there's so much tied up in being a provider and a protector
Yes.
and a this, that, and the other, these kind of masculine things. And that he essentially was saying, "Hey, this is good and all, but you better research men, because people don't allow men to be vulnerable. They don't
It's
allow
true.
men to feel. And they would
Yep.
rather, are a lot of people would rather men die on their white horse, the
Yep.
knight in patriarchal armor, than
Yes.
ever do
Yes, it's so
that
true.
work."
And then I think that the feminist movement hasn't always done a good job about examining how men have been hurt by the patriarchy. because the patriarchy
Mhm.
is the enemy, not men. So and men have
Exactly.
been definitely victims of that. That's why they don't go to therapy as often as women do. Why
Mhm.
they tend to die early when their spouses die if they're married to a woman. I mean, it's just sad. There's so many
It is.
casualties that are like not. It's like when he says like, "How convenient," I totally feel for that guy. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Let's get into allowing more language around emotions, vulnerability, and heart types are
Mhm.
great at teaching us that. And if you're a male heart type, really accept that about yourself and do that deep work of that. Shame is probably just coming from just how you've been made and like how your
Exactly.
personality is. It's good stuff. You need it for
Exactly.
your relationships. So
Whew.
but that's some good stuff. I love talking about stuff. It's so fun.
Let's
Um,
let's move on to the gut. Let's
let's move on. Yes,
transition our
fun
way.
gut types. Yes. People are kind of curious about this one, I think, because it's people want to think about head and they can think about heart, and that makes sense to them. They're like, but what is like a body sensing? Like, if especially if you're not a body type, or if you're not an 8, because I think 8s are really great at understanding how their body makes them do things. But you can tell us more, Alex, in a minute. But I think like, well, how do we know things with our body? How does that work? And we talk about words like intuition, sensing instead of like thinking or feeling.
Mhm.
And those are good words. I like them. Sometimes they mean different things to other people, but
Yeah.
I think ultimately, as a body types, they all end up just having this sense of the environment and physicality.
Mhm.
So that is the sense, and it's again coming kind of back to animal instincts a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, but I think the main theme is actually anger, but some people say rage, actually,
Oof.
which is interesting.
Ooh,
So
I'm way more comfortable with the anger than
rage,
oh
and
my
nines are like,
gosh.
oh, rage. I think that, and I think they're both interesting words that can kind of elicit different responses in people.
Absolutely.
Um, I always tell this joke. Maybe I told this one at the last one. Oh, but it's not a joke. It's a story about how in graduate school we were taught to draw our anger. I don't know if I said this to you. Have I told you the story? Um,
You know what? If you have, I can't remember it. So.
okay, so like I'm 20, some mid 20s, something years old, and our professor is saying, okay, get a piece of paper out. Gave us some art supplies for therapy grad school, and it's like time to draw your anger. You can draw an animal. You can just do colors and shapes. And this little 9, who'd done very little work on herself at the time, sat there and stared at a blank piece of paper the entire 20 minutes. And I was like, well, this is telling. I had worked so hard to deny my anger that I literally had no idea where it was. And I really tried hard. I'm a good student. I like to do well in school. I really struggled with this assignment. Everybody's drawing like bears and snakes and fires and all these things. And I'm like, I don't know. That's why I do want to allow the 9s here to know that I've had that experience. Now my anger is one of my good friends, I like to say, but it has taken some work for sure. When we talk about overdoing it, underdoing it, it might be kind of obvious. 8s are going to be the one that overdoes it. Really
Mhm.
comfortable with anger, uses it quite often, even gets praised for it.
Mhm.
And then the 9s are going to underdo it, deny it, repress it. Not a big deal. And the 1s are more ambivalent. They, interestingly though, that 1's vice is anger and rage. Specifically, I have to say rage because it's more negative for vice. And but the ambivalence is it comes and goes with whether it's outward or inward. The anger
Mhm.
can go outward like a snake or inward and hurt them. So there is a little bit of that ambivalence with the type in the gut too. So the theme about anger is sometimes about justice, the right and wrong.
Yeah.
And again, it comes back to how do I know something's right or wrong? A head type is going to give you a very different answer than a body type. A head type's like, well, okay, well, we have these theories and this makes sense based on this teacher and da 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 da. And philosophy says blah blah blah. But a body type's gonna be like, well, it just feels wrong. We're not gonna do that. That's bad, or that's good, and that's can be a blind spot for sure for all the types. But I think like 8, 9s, and 1s, they are body based, and so there can be this overuse, this underuse, because we fear it. 9s really fear their anger. I'll also say that it's very scary.
Mhm.
Um, it's like fear because it comes back to our fear of disconnection. our anger is going to push others away. And so that's why we work very hard. And I had worked very hard in my grad school level to never feel angry.
Yeah.
But I hadn't seen that until that moment. And so I think ultimately the ones to have to understand like where anger shows up, whether it's internal or pushing out as well, like towards other people or situations.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell us what it's like to be an 8 and experience your body and being a body type, Alex. Where is your body kind of aware of its environment, physicality?
Mhm.
How does that drive you? Your experience of anger as well would be helpful, or even rage. What rages
Yeah.
you? I'd love to know.
Oh man, I should have kind of like been thinking about this as we were coming towards this part of our it's well, I think that very often, and again, this is like my experience of the
Sure.
world, so like this probably isn't indicative of all eights, but I very often find that like my entire body posture is actually pretty like tense and braced. I actually am kind of like always a little um it takes a lot actually for me to truly be relaxed, and I actually come off as a pretty, like, chill, relax, go with the flow
Yeah,
person,
you don't
but
seem
very
like very
often
tense to me.
exactly, but very often in my body, like, my core is
Oh
always
yes, and that's where the gut is, right there.
yep, my core is always kind of braced, and even, like, specifically, this is probably gonna sound weird, but, like, my calves and into my, like, that tendon that runs right down your leg,
Uh-huh.
I can always tell
Mhm.
how stressed I am by,
By
like,
that
that part of
particular
my
tendon.
body, because it's kind of like
Oh,
I'm always like, I'm ready to go, you know?
sure,
So,
sure, sure.
yeah,
Wow.
I think that
That's
I think
great.
that,
And so there's a tenseness, I think, to
the
eights. I think
tenseness.
I think all eights can maybe identify this as being as true. So ready for action. It's like I
Yep,
might be sitting, but I'm gonna spring. Like
yep,
there's like inner tigress, or like there's this like I'm
yeah,
going to spring, and it's not always like attack. It's just
no,
do usually. I'm going to say something. I'm going to do something. My body just telling me to
yep.
act.
But there's a lot of times, honestly, when it comes to sports, when it comes to even, so like in sports, there's a lot of times instinctually that I actually like won't be trained in any type of sport, but I'll play it. And I just kind of,
Mm.
if I don't think about what I'm doing and I just kind of do it,
Yeah,
I will perform really well in sports. Or there
I
was
believe
once when
that.
I
I wonder
was,
if that's an eight thing.
I don't know, I
That's
have
wonderful.
no idea, but
I
there was
can't.
also just like,
I have struggled so much with sports for that reason because I think I'm so repressed in my body.
I would
But
imagine
music,
so.
I can do that. I can do that with music because I'm a musician. I can just not think about it, and then I play
Yep,
well.
yep.
It is. I think that's a body experience. There's
Hmm.
other activities I think that require the body intelligence. We can
Yeah.
think about athletes that do that, but musicians also to some degree.
Yeah.
Like there is this like gelling with your environment and being one with
Yeah.
your environment to some degree.
Because
um
there's definitely times where, like, I mean, I remember I was taking this is kind of like a scary thing, but I was taking an exit too fast out in the suburbs, and it had just rained a little bit, so it was slick. And my car, Priscilla, literally did one of those, like, where it went
oh my gosh.
360 degrees around. And I can't even tell you my thought process in knowing, oh, yeah, I have to turn the wheel this way, I have to turn the wheel this way. And I ended up straight and just heading back the way I needed to go.
Do you know
And
that
it's kind
exact
of,
thing happened to me? Oh my god. I didn't even know I ended up straight too. It was crazy. It was terrifying.
it's a
But like
really,
my body just took over. There is that
yep,
sense, and I think that might be like survival. But I think that that's a good
okay.
example of like your body like has this intelligence that you can rely on.
Yep.
And I'm talking to the head and the heart types right now. We're just gonna preach
Yeah.
the gospel of the body type, the body intelligence. So like this is something that you know how to do. You don't think you do, and you actually don't know it until it's happening because the body is present. That's another key thing about
Exactly.
body types
Yeah.
is that everything is about the present moment. It doesn't mean
Mhm.
we don't have anxiety, but we have less anxiety than the head types for sure, and even the heart types to some degree
Yep.
because
Yep.
we are right now more so, um, especially if we're
I
in tune with our
wonder,
bodies.
I'm thinking about this also again from like a neuroscience perspective. The Center for Intelligence is like, if you kind of think like the hand model of the brain that Dan Siegel really developed, it's almost
Oh
like,
yeah.
that you have like kind of your brain stem here that's more
Hmm.
kind of your body, just the way your body runs. It's more survival. It's just kind of like, it's things you don't even think about, like your eyes dilating, your heart beating, your digestion, that
Mhm.
those
Yeah,
take
you don't have to
place in your
tell
brain.
your body to do those things, right? It's
Exactly.
just going.
Yeah. And then you have kind of your emotional center in the very right side of your
Mhm.
brain. And I just kind of wonder, oh, is that maybe the center? Like if the brain
Yeah,
stem is the center of the body type,
the
is
body.
the
Ooh, I
heart
love
type,
that. I can see
the
that.
heart type, I think, is probably centered in that
The right side.
emotional, right
Yes.
side. And then you have kind of the prefrontal cortex, this whole area that's logic and thinking and
Yes.
cognition and stuff
Planning.
like that. And
Yes.
is that the head, that maybe from a neuroscience
Yes.
perspective, there's some things we can learn,
Absolutely.
about the
There's a lot.
centers
I
of
love this
intelligence.
incorporation of psychology and science, and I think that's really important because if something's true, I mean, we can follow
Hmm.
that and pull up that thread and see where this makes sense. I
Hmm.
do think that there's a lot to learn when it
Yeah.
comes to the different intelligences, and again, we're going back to our bias of what we value to be intelligent. But this brainstem or body
Hmm.
intelligence is so important for keeping us safe, actually, to some
Yeah.
degree, like we in our stories of like scary things in the car, but
I know.
also just in general, like when we meet someone too. I mean, have you ever had that feeling
Yeah.
in a grocery store or or like out in public, or when you meet someone for the first time, like, I'm not sure, I don't trust that person, but I don't. And now maybe
Well,
it could be literally trauma, or it could be like your anxiety talking and the person's fine, but sometimes body types are really more to be trusted in situations like that because they can sense that maybe that bar is just not safe. Um,
yeah.
they can't really explain why. They don't have like a 3-point plan about why, because that would be a head thing. And then they really don't have any feelings about it. They just kind of know.
Honestly, I am like at this present moment in time that we're recording this, I'm a single person. So if I go on a date with somebody, I actually can tell you in the first 10 to 15 seconds whether it's gonna go somewhere or not.
Oh,
Like
I have no
it's
doubt.
and I think that that's probably for a lot of people, but I literally can almost like make eye contact with somebody and realize, oh, this is or is not gonna go somewhere.
I tend to
So
say I think the body types are a little more decisive, and I think eights are the most decisive. Um,
yeah.
when it comes to that, because maybe they're also so ready for action. It's like, okay, here's a decision. Um,
Hmm.
I think the eights, the growth path for the eight is about the heart and about the
I think
head,
it is.
because they
Hmm.
talk. Beatrice Chestnut talks about over being impulsive for the eight because they're
Hmm.
not acting on their heart or their head. I think head probably for they need their head for the lack of so being restraining that impulse
Yeah.
control.
Yeah.
um, and I think that the heart too is really important for eights to be aware of that too space of like their sensitivity and knowing that like they don't have to just act on their anger or they don't have to act and be ready for action at any moment. And that
Yeah.
intelligence is there for their heart and they can pick up on that for their relationships because sometimes
Right.
overdoing all that action and that anger really harms relationships and harms
Mhm.
ourselves and harms our jobs and careers and all that. And people can praise the leadership of the eight too much in a family system, and then you never know some of the softer parts, the
Mm-mm.
emotional pieces of what they struggle with. And
Yeah.
the eight doesn't want to share because then they're not going to be praised for being that leader and that strong,
Mhm. Yeah.
presence. Um, do you think that's
It's
true?
interesting. I think it is true, and I was just having a conversation with somebody where I basically was like, I actually have to work pretty hard to convince somebody that I'm not doing okay.
Yes.
And
Oh, I'm
that
sure
is
that's the problem with eights.
it's
Yes.
it's just kind of like
People don't want to
no, let
believe
me.
it. They're like, we
Oh,
need you
and
to be strong.
yeah, and I think too, there's in a way that can kind of look very behaviorally three-ish, there's kind of an over-functioning sometimes in a lot of ways.
Yes,
But I
totally.
think,
Mm.
I'm kind of going back to what you said about ones being the ambivalent type, because I think, and I'm just maybe not remembering it correctly, but almost as it works with anger, the way that I learned it, which this is important to learn the Enneagram from different teachers actually, because I think
Yes, I
then
agree.
if you learn it from multiple teachers, which is why this is actually even kind of fun. If you learn it from multiple teachers, you
Mhm.
can kind of pick up on different nuances. But the eights, it's almost like directionally with their anger is like they're angry at everything outside of
Yes.
themselves.
Right.
I very much so operate. This is terrible. People think I'm a really nice person, and I would like to say I am a nice person. And in my balance, I actually
But really,
operate in more of a gray space. But I very much so, when I'm kind of stressed or frustrated, operate off of like a shit list or an it list. And you're either black or white. You're on my shit
uh-huh.
list or you're on my it list. And if you're on my it list, like if anybody crosses you, like so help them. It's kind of that anger,
Mm,
intensity,
very
like
fixated.
anybody on
Mhm.
my team at work, they are for sure like my it list. And if
Your
anybody
people.
crosses
Mhm.
anybody up for my people, I'm just kind of like, oh, you don't even know what's coming for you, you know?
And people
But
love
it's
that. That's the problem, right? They want you to do that to people. Because some of us are
mhm,
afraid to do that, especially maybe nines.
yeah.
Um, like, yeah, we love our aides. They protect me. And also, so I don't have to protect myself. But whatever. It
You
works
know,
out for me. But like they want that. And so so then
yeah,
it really gives like the eight, like it really reinforces that
yeah.
justifying your ego to do that.
Exactly. I cannot tell you how many times in an email at work I have said, if I need to be the bad guy, just let me know. I don't mind, you know?
I sign up.
But exactly. But I think it's interesting that you identified the directional piece in a little bit different way than how I think about it. And I'm gonna have to kind of noodle on that a little bit. But really, it was kind of the repressed nine as the ambivalent, and the ones, their
Yes.
anger, although they're very kind of like they want things to be good and right and moral and perfect, and they can be very critical of their outside world. It's like with the ones, it's actually like they get angry at themselves for
Oh,
not being
yes.
able to
It's both.
show up perfectly. So when I learned it, it
Yes.
was actually more that the anger piece is more inward, whereas eights is more outward, and nines are
Yes.
more kind of like repressed ambivalent.
You're right. I think yes. The ones, I think the reason why I differentiate the ones between inner and out, I
Makes
think is
sense to
because
me
of
what you said.
subtype.
Yeah, it
They
makes sense to me.
subtypes. Some subtypes are more like self-pres ones are definitely more inward than out, although they will judge the outside world also. That anger can kind of move in an interesting direction back and forth, but eights tend not to really take that anger out on themselves. Is that true?
No, maybe in a real
No.
rough moment, but no, not. I would say no. It's kind of like, no, I'm the
No.
right way to be.
You're on the shit list. I'm not on my shit list, but ones will put themselves on their shit list for sure. They can,
Yeah, yeah,
especially certain
exactly.
subtypes. But yeah, I think that's a really helpful description of the eight. Thank you. I think that when it comes to, well, we'll talk about gender at the end, and I want to talk about eights too, and then you can talk about that. But we'll go to the nine. Um, the nine, specifically with anger, as I talked about my story a little bit, there's a lot of repression, and a lot
Mhm.
of fear of anger, a lot of it. So the issues always come back to feeling angry. And I'll talk when I coach nines, I won't use words like anger. I'm like, oh, do you feel angry? They'll be like, not really. I don't really
No.
feel that very often. So if you talk to a nine, they will be like, no, and they're not lying. They're not just in denial. They're not
Mhm.
like thinking they're angry and telling you no. What they actually don't actually experience it, but what they might experience is a different word. They might actually experience
Mhm.
irritability. When they say I feel hurt feelings, they actually might be upset with you.
Yeah.
um, they might feel like annoyed at a situation, but again, they'll use more mild words like irritated, annoyed, frustrated, kind of bummed. These are not feeling hard words. I'll just tell you for a nine, if you know nine, these are like, I'm pissed actually, but I don't know how to get there. So these are the little,
I'm gonna remember that.
uh, yes, of just like, I'm kind of annoyed a little bit. Like, I don't know. I'm mad. That's what that means. There's a
Mhm.
lot of like the language, the nine talks about anger is going to be a lot more mild, because we really don't want to fight with you. We don't want you to fight with us. We fear what fighting and conflict would bring. And interestingly, the wings can really get us into trouble sometimes or help us out tremendously. As we're in the center right there, having an eight wing is a really interesting experience. I didn't find my eight wing until much later. I really do believe that eight is like the wings development. You can have a really strong wing
I agree.
as you grow up and develop, and then over time, as you work on yourself, you'll find your other side. But for a long
Mhm.
time, I was really, really afraid of anything eight like challenging
Mhm.
anyone. Um, and so I think I was heavily on my one side doing the right thing. But again, this is all anger issues of like, I need to do the right thing because I don't want to be wrong. and I'm still going using my body to find those right and wrong. But all that to say, my experience of feeling as a body type, I would say, let me see if I can answer that question. I should have thought about this too. I would say specifically my experience of body type is about discomfort. I'm very aware of my physical environment, lighting, clothing, even like discomfort on a pain level to some degree, almost like a 7 to some degree. I don't want to be in physical pain, but a little bit different. I want to be comfortable in not just my body, but in my mind. So comfort is peace, kind of. So I think like the body, paying attention to my comfortability is where I kind of pick up on like vibes and things like that. Also, like if we're comfortable together, I'm really picking up on that in my body, more so than how I feel about you or what I think about you.
Right.
You know, they're like, oh, tell me about your relationship with your husband. I'm like, I just feel like myself with him. That's not really like a, I love him with all my heart, or here's why he's a great husband. It's like, I just feel good. You know, that's why our relationship works. And again, this is how a body type talks about things a little bit. There's like, I sense this good thing, or I sense this bad thing. And I didn't always put that together with body until I learned more about the Enneagram, but that's my intelligence center at work. And relationships are absolutely that way too. If something feels off to me, that's about, oh, I fear disconnection, so I'm going to go talk to that person about it. I might, especially now that I'm willing to do conflict a little bit more, I'm using my body intelligence to do that. But again, the underdevelopment is really can be problematic, and I won't say that I've figured it out either. There's things I don't pick up on with my head, and I don't use my head, and I depend on my body sometimes too much to get me through something. So like I need to sit down and analyze something about what I want to say and critically think about what I did. That's hard. That's not something that comes naturally. And that can get me in trouble if I'm not using my heart for something I need to use my heart with. With relationships, I need to be like, what am I actually feeling, Priscilla? You know, like I think for body types to sit there and do that is not easy. To name, like even when we're like saying, oh, 5s need to get their feelings real up, and so do 3s, but 9s do too, and body types do too. Like let's sit there and be like, am I feeling sad? It's as basic as that. Am I feeling misunderstood? And in that case, I'm not like, my body's not going to tell me that. My body might tell me something feels off, but then I have to keep doing that work. Of like, what's off? Oh, well, that person reminded me of how, you know, my dad used to treat me, or like, you know, that's exactly, you know, what I think about, what it reminds me of, and it makes me feel sad. So like doing that work, it's going to start in your main center. But like you need to continue to do that work once you've recognized it. Oh yeah, I think that's the 9, right? Specifically. Let's move on to the 1. Let me wrap it up here. The 1 specifically, their anger comes out, as we said, I think already, internally or externally. I think that depends on subtype. I would say self-pres 1s, social 1s, which we'll get into our next talk, talking about subtypes. They tend to do a little more internal anger at themselves, that perfectionism of wanting to pursue the perfect at all times. Well, they're never good enough. So that is really painful for 1s and can bring a lot of anxiety, especially if you're a self-pres 1. But sexual 1s tend to not experience as much of that. They're more outward because they're more about that one-on-one bond with their main people. And so they tend to want to reform other people. And so that anger is driving a lot of that too. And I think the body is interesting with the ambivalent type, I would say. It goes to, it's a different, I think I love the subtype for the 1, because I think that it really helps break down the nuance. Because again, 1s can look like different types as well. They're not going to be like, oh, she's definitely an 8 or definitely a 9. 1s are really hard workers, but instead of like the 3 who's driven by their feelings, they're going to be driven more by anger, that sense of justice and the right, but it really is about like correct. And so they are self-referencing for that reason of like, my body is going to tell me the right way, and then I might find some reasons to back it up in my head space, but I'm really leading with my body.
Exactly.
So the 1s do need to kind of go into their heart space to connect with other people, for sure. and their head as well. Does that make sense that, I have these expectations of others or myself? Is this realistic?
Yeah.
Is this kind and compassionate toward myself
Yep.
and others? So kind of overdoing that body type for the ones is about kindness for yourself and others, which isn't going to be found in your one. It's going to be found in your heart center. Or maybe it could be found in your body. If you're being kind to your body, I'll take that back. Being kind to your body will have definitely some more grace for yourself and not having to be so rigid and hard on yourself with your anger. So it can soften that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, we need to talk about the gender too.
Let's talk about gender and culture as it relates to the gut, and then maybe we'll say last comments and kind of put what we'll talk about next time there at the end. So, but yeah, culture, gender as it relates to the gut, as it relates to the body.
I love your thoughts on this too. Yeah, I think that when we think about action, we think about men. Right?
Assertive, move forward. No, that is,
yes.
it is kind of a masculine energy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think that when it comes to aggression, ones or eights that can be more aggressive sometimes. We think about masculine energy.
Like a visceral, sensual.
Yeah, so we think about anger or rage too. This is a masculine quality. Women that get angry or rageful are bitches.
Exactly.
It's not as acceptable for a woman to be angry. And so, or to take action decisively, they're going to be called bossy, etc. So I think that those are the gender things. I think if you are a male body type, beware of taking, justifying your ego as being a good thing on that end of like, I am so decisive, I'm so action oriented. You have a heart and you have a head, be sure to use them. To the males, and so to the women, to really pat yourself on the back that these decisive qualities are important and action is important and anger is just important as any other feeling. And so those two gender dynamics are huge. I think women nines are nice. People like women nines because we're not confrontational. And so we get validated for that. Oh, you're so nice. I love being around you. You never confront me. It's great. That's a problem. And then eights. Oh, you're such a strong person. I love being around how strong you are. You're going to protect me. Da, 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 da. But they get shit on too. The female eights so much for being too strong.
I have I kind of have a funny, whenever I think about this, I have a funny story that I think of. And, part of my cultural upbringing is actually like a pretty, like conservative Christian environment. And I think that you can have a struggle as a more masculine type of person in regard without a Christian background and stuff like that. But within these last few years, I found myself in a, this has been years ago, but it just illustrates it so perfectly. I was in a like a course on public speaking as it's to like teaching and preaching the Bible actually. And essentially, it was a lot of fun. Honestly, everybody was so educated. I'm there as like a counseling psychology person, and they're there as like, MDivs, PhDs, in like Bible and theology and stuff like that. And predominantly 95% male as well. And so we're sitting around this table, and just logistically something was wrong, and we needed more. Two different people were presenting. We needed more copies of, their different things so that everybody would have it. And we're spending like 10 minutes in this disorganized way. How do we figure out how to get the right amount of copies and people can kind of like have the papers in front of them? And eventually I'm sitting there and I just say, okay, I said, who needs page number 1? And people raise their hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, 8 people. Josh prints 8 copies. Okay, who needs thing number 2? 6 people. Josh. 6. And so, and then everything was fine and we moved on. Well, it wasn't until like a week or 2 later, I was having a conversation with my friend who was visiting. Wonderful person. I don't think he realized what he was saying, but he basically was like, hey, we were talking about gender, and he says, yeah, well, a lot of men would actually, I haven't thought about this circumstance since then. He says, but then it comes up. He says, well, that was actually pretty, like a lot of men would have been very uncomfortable with you doing that. And I was like, wait a second, what? And he says, yeah, like the way you took action And he was saying it in a way of like, I'm comfortable with that, but I was like, the fact that you noticed that actually tells me a lot about your discomfort with me as a woman, kind of like with all these kind of people who are more powerful than me in that situation. I lost my headphone again. What is happening? But
Oh yeah,
people
you
who are
showed
more
that.
powerful. Exactly. And it was just kind of like because a woman took charge and said, hey, this, and this, and solved a problem very quickly in a
Uh-huh.
very male dominated leadership focused
Yeah.
circle, it was kind of viewed as like, oh my gosh, I
Yes.
can't believe that you
It
did
broke a
that.
lot of patriarchal norms and culture norms in the
Hmm.
West. They were saying men are more valued to have these decisive actions. And so when a woman violates that,
Hmm.
even if men, even if men really like cognitively agree that women should be in charge more and like it's not very equal, sometimes in these
Absolutely.
moments we just have this patriarchal bias of like, oh, that
Absolutely.
didn't
It's
feel
part of our
good. I didn't
culture.
like that. Yeah, like I
Hmm.
didn't like that she did that, and maybe that means something about her. Like again, this is why bias is really important to examine.
Yeah.
It's like ask yourself, would I be upset if a man did that or not? If like a
Hmm.
man took
Hmm.
action versus a woman or taking charge in that way and solving a problem. And
I
I think the
think,
more insecure you are, the more upset you'll be.
yeah. And I think something that's unfortunate about how gender plays out with eights specifically is I do think a lot of female eights undersell themselves, or
Oh
they're
yeah,
always kind of
they're careful.
tampering,
They've been burned.
the too much personality. They're always kind of
Yes,
tampering
very scared of
some of
that.
their
Mhm.
personality because of their intensity or just different things like that. So it definitely is a thing.
Yes, and I just think all those female eights out there that are doing that, you are your intensity is important as long as it works for you and other people.
Oh yeah, you can't, can't be
You can help you do
steamrolling
it.
people.
Yes, but sometimes it's so needed, and to mute yourself based on these cultural norms is such a damn shame. And so
Yeah.
like having awareness when it works for you and to speak up and with courage is so needed.
Yeah.
Um, and so thank you for that example. It's really important.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And I think men who are nines can really feel upset about or get praised for being like non-aggressive. And so when they do lose their minds or get really angry, people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. He's just being a man. I've heard that with some of my clients.
Yeah.
Some of the male nines, some of them, they're really praised for being non-aggressive.
Yeah.
Because we expect men to be aggressive somehow.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
there's a lot of male masculinity qualities to the one I found. I actually don't have a
Hmm.
lot of info on this. I've watched a couple of panels, and that seems to be the emerging theme. Women who are
Interesting.
ones like seem to really identify with their fathers a lot, or like a father type figure. It's very interesting. Again, like if people think that's true, they can comment, I guess. I think that makes sense. They tend to yeah, there's just like this gut energy, decisive action that's not as
Hmm.
in your face as an eight might be, but it's still very like,
Strong.
I don't know, strong. Yes,
Hmm.
just the
It's
masculine
strong.
qualities of like, we're gonna do it the right way, follow me, let's go. And so that like, I don't know, the masculine energy is really present. I think the nines are kind of
Exactly.
androgynous though in general. I don't know if there's a lot of like
I think they are.
typical like presentations, and because we merge so much with different energies, I might have a lot more masculine energy. I notice this as a therapist. I'm talking to a dad, I'm like lowering my voice, and I might be like standing like this. And I'm just like, to get them to respect me to some degree. I think I did that more, but when I'm not paying attention, but I've noticed my body can shift a little bit with the energy
Absolutely.
that I'm experiencing. When my voice gets higher with my girlfriends, I think like, and they're like softer expressions and mannerisms. Again, just something to pay attention to. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. Well, we have really kind of like almost, let's see, 12. It is this is a long one.
the long
I should
one.
have
I
said that
know.
at the front end. This is a long one. And honestly, probably next week, because we're covering so much material, it just is going to be long.
Yes.
But next week, I think because, you start out with the core concept and then you kind of build on it and then you build on it. So, I think that next week, just being the fact that like the subtypes, which again is one of the most understood
Mm-hmm.
um, concepts within the Enneagram and arguably the most important outside of
Yes.
core type. Like maybe even just as important as core type, in my
Yes. I totally
humble
agree with
opinion.
that.
Yeah.
It's very important to
So,
understand your subtype. Yes. For
yeah.
your blind spots.
So
Absolutely.
so we'll kind of, I just really thank you for your knowledge, for your wisdom, for
This
hanging
is
out
so
this
fun.
long with me on a Zoom
Yeah.
call, on record, just to kind of make sure
Yes,
that
this was
people
so
like
fun.
start to understand. Oh, I love it. I love it. So, all right. I will talk to you next week.
Okay.
Have a good rest of your day.
Yes,
See you
thanks.
later.
Bye.
Bye.